It comes down to two really big things for me, right? The very first thing is how do we help the citizen as much as possible do the right things to secure their information and empower government to have those capabilities so that we're doing everything we possibly can.
From Tyler Technologies, it's the Tyler Tech Podcast, where we talk about issues facing communities today and highlight the people, places, and technology making a difference. I'm Beth Amon. I'm the corporate marketing manager here at Tyler, and I appreciate you joining me for another episode of the Tyler Tech Podcast. Today, we're joined by Mike Teeters, Tyler's Senior Product Manager of Corporate Development, and Nick Winston, Senior Director of Product Strategy for our Digital Solutions Division. Mike brings his expertise in customer identity and access management to this conversation. In his role, he guides the productization of Tyler's identity workforce and identity community solutions, playing a pivotal role in service delivery and resident engagement. Nick directs the roadmap and initiatives of Tyler's resident engagement platform, shaping the resident's digital journey with a strategic perspective on product development for Tyler Tech. Together, we will dig into engaging residents through digital services such as customer identity and access management solutions. Mike and Nick, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here.
Well, we are here to talk about a key way in which governments can engage with their residents through digital services. But before we dig into it, let's get some definitions down. What does customer identity and access management mean?
Great question, Beth. When we think about customer identity and access management, we're thinking about the tools that our organizations that we work with, our clients use to determine a person's identity, to ensure that the interactions that they're having are secure, and also so that they're able to have an enhanced customer experience, right? So if you think of customer identity access management, we can just swap out the word citizen for customer, and it fits really well and has the same acronym for public sector.
It's very convenient that we can still use the same acronym because CIAM is something we will be using. So citizen, customer, and since this is a public sector podcast, it works out perfectly that we can say citizen instead of customer. So how are residents coming across CIAM systems in their daily lives? Like for me as a resident, how would I recognize that?
Yeah, I mean, you're probably experiencing CIAM more typically in just your general online presence, especially like if you're doing any kind of online shopping at common e-retailers. Take Amazon, for example. Very common example to use in these situations, but not only do you have a username and password to sign in, but then you have a lot of information about you, your recent purchases, your payment information, anything like that, extensive profile details. And with that, then they're able to layer in understanding of who you are, understanding what you've done in the past, and better guide you to the things that you may be interested or desire. So it's more than just being able to log in, just a username and password or anything like that. It's username and password plus having some understanding of who you are in context of the relationship to the e-retailer or to the online situation that you might be interacting with.
And Beth, I'd probably add to that. I think what Nick's highlighting is that we voluntarily help Amazon build out this profile. So another really good example of that, and again, we see parallels in public sector, is you probably get emails from Amazon telling you about things that are on sale, right? Prime opportunities, really looking at your purchase history and the kinds of things that you're interested in, and then really kind of aligning that to highlight where there are opportunities for you to potentially save money, right? I'll kind of match you up with different products or services that would be a good fit for you, right? I think we could probably talk a bit more about how that really fits in the public sector, but really good examples of things that you see in your day-to-day experiences with retailers.
Yeah, I first off really appreciate hearing that it's CIAM. So I learned something new already, that it's not CIAM, but CIAM is the acronym. And I think it's a really interesting point of view because for so much of these conversations, I'm coming at it from the point of view of, okay, what can governments do? What can governments do? And I feel like in the past two conversations I've had in our previous episode with Russell Gainford about the resident experience, I'm learning so much about how it can benefit the resident, like the value prop you give to the citizen to the resident. And just the way you all brought that up, that I am giving information to help me have a better experience with the government, that it's not just having a single password to use. By my sharing information with my government about my preferences, about the services I use, that it starts allowing the government to start provide better services and create efficiencies. So I feel like I just learned something already about a resident's experience, but from a government's point of view, how can CIAM improve and expand those digital services that they're already offering? It seems like there's a lot of room for efficiencies to be created.
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of growth just in the idea of being able to leverage an identity access management solution that's public facing, right? That's really geared towards citizens. Probably the area that we've seen the most growth is really around this concept of single sign-on or SSO, right? And what we mean by that is that a lot of times you probably had experiences where you've interacted with different departments or agencies in the same government, but you needed a different set of credentials in order to go in and pay your utility bill, and then you needed a different set of credentials in order to do something else with that same government entity. SSO really moves us down the path of having one set of credentials, right? So you only have to authenticate one time. We use that same set of credentials and it gets you across all those different services. So that's a really good first step. And it's an area that Nick and I have seen really a lot of growth. So you can imagine now you get a much more fluid experience being able to move between different websites that are all associated with the same government or different services. There's no need for an additional authentication step.
Yeah, and to add on to that a little bit, the beauty once you have that single sign-on solution, that SSO solution in place, is you then have a singular CIAM system, which then creates the ability to have a singular identity to represent a given user, right? And that identity to be shared across those different agencies, those different departments, and even potentially the different levels of government. We have some opportunities that we're actively building out some interfaces, leveraging Tyler ID with, to be that CIAM solution, both for the state, but also into the counties and into the cities, so that those users just have one sign-in across all those different levels of government. But having that shared identity that I kind of was mentioning earlier allows us then to have a singular profile of who that user is, right? And that profile could include some basic information of my name, my phone number, my address, right? So I don't have to constantly put that information in each time I'm interacting with government. But it even goes further to understand, what are my vehicles, right? What are my pets I have and the pet licenses I have for those pets? What are my professional licenses? And being more proactive, letting government be more proactive in a consolidated manner to help me understand what are my commitments and interests and what I need to go do. And that even ties into, these very robust service catalogs. I mean, just to give an example, some of these states, the state level government alone will have 400, 500 services for their citizens. And to navigate and understand all those different services I need to go to when the government really doesn't know me as a consolidated person, right, is really difficult, because then it's on me. The burden's on me to go find these things and understand how to navigate to these different services to get to the end result I'm trying to get to. If we know that, if we have a singular identity, we have a singular understanding, then we can help connect that for the citizen proactively and help guide them through and say, of the 400 or 500 services, here's the 10 or 20 that you might need to go interact with. And here's maybe even the sequence that you need to go interact with them, so that, because one might build on the other. I said a lot there, but I think that's really kind of getting to the crux of what resident engagement is and how that helps government, right? Then how government then helps these citizens in navigating this complex world that is the different services and such that government provides to their citizens.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff in what you all just shared. And the things that kind of stand out to me are the idea of I am responsible for remembering all of my passwords to the DMV and the Department of Licensing and the Department of Taxation. And I need to know where my pets are registered and where my kids are going to summer camp and where they're at public schools and all of those details. If they were in one consolidated place, that would change my interaction with government. And you brought up a point about having data shared between different levels of government that I think is really critical, because you live in a city perhaps, but that city might be housed within a county and that county is housed within a state, or you live somewhere like I do, where I live in DC. And so I'm interacting in my daily life with Virginia and Maryland. And if I'm feeling adventurous, West Virginia or Pennsylvania. But there are so many different governments that I'm interacting with on a daily basis as someone who lives in a centralized location. And that's the same for anyone who maybe works in the city but lives in the county, or lives in a town and works in a city, that there's so much data sharing that could be beneficial to everyone on both sides, not just saying, oh, it's making things easier for me, but it's making things easier for the government who's trying to offer comprehensive services to their community.
Yeah, and Beth, I'll kind of add a point to what Nick highlighted. I think most of us can think of really basic things that we do when we interact with government, right? We have to fill out a form in order to qualify for a service, right? Or, we have to pay a bill. To Nick's point, if you just look at some of these basic things that we do, really kind of making these incremental improvements in terms of adding that data to a profile, allowing that data to be shared, right? Always having, so you can imagine you go to fill out a form. Well, all of the information you've already filled out, your name, your phone number, your address, right? All of those kind of key pieces of data, if you're open to sharing it, form gets filled out automatically. So all of those kinds of efficiencies, I think, are, when we've talked with clients and prospective clients, it's that kind of low-hanging fruit that I think gets people excited, and it's very doable.
I think it gets even, I didn't elaborate on this, but I think this is maybe a good point to kind of elaborate on this a little bit. It even gets beyond having a singular identity and having a singular profile where we know and we can help share that information, especially taking into security considerations and data privacy and, all those nuances that go into solving this problem. But it gets much further beyond that for us as Tyler, right? Because we can also do things like centralized payment and have centralized payment features. So you can have one, say, payment method or one access to your Apple Wallet or whatever that might be for all of your checkouts using Tyler payments across all different government entities that might be connected with that. We can centralize all of your receipts, right? So if you need to go back for tax purposes and tax write-offs and such, based on some of the taxes you might have paid for other situations, you can get back to all those receipts and have proof of that in one centralized location. You can manage all of your recurring and scheduled payments that you might have with government in one centralized location. We can centralize events and calendars for you so that it's a more personalized based on your commitments and interests, right? And not have to go poking around in different calendars to find out. We can even centralize things like official documents. Say there's a document that comes out for a park pass that you get out of a transaction. We can put that in a location that's right next to maybe your nursing license or something like that, and have one place where you can get to all of that. So that's what, kind of expanding upon this idea of CIAM, having a singular identity, having a singular profile and sharing that, you can go so much further over time once you kind of have those pieces established.
We'll be right back for more of our conversation.
What's up, Tyler community? It's so crazy how quick the summer flew by, but we are so excited that August is here because we are one step closer to City Hall Selfie Day, which happens to be on Tuesday, August 15th this year. City Hall Selfie Day celebrates public service, and it elevates its importance by asking community members to take a creative photo in front of their local government building. City Hall Selfie Day is organized by ELGL, short for Engaging Local Government Leaders, which is a professional association for people who work in and with local government. At Tyler, we're all about empowering people who serve the public, so we wanted to make sure you knew about this special day. We might be biased, but City Hall Selfie Day is one of the best days of the year because we get to see all your smiling faces in a cool selfie that showcases your love for your local government. All you need to do is take a creative picture of yourself or of your crew in front of a local government building like City Hall, a library, or a courthouse, and then post it to social media. Creativity is highly encouraged. Use costumes, different angles, and just have fun with it because ELGL hosts a People's Choice Award. And if you win for the most creative photo, you get bragging rights for the entire year. Use the hashtag CityHallSelfie to enter, and if you're a Tyler Tech client or partner, use the hashtag TylerTechSelfie so that we can find your photos. Don't forget to tag ELGL and Tyler Technologies in your social media posts. We can't wait to see your selfies.
And now back to our conversation. Yeah, that is such a good point. And it makes me start to think about, okay, all of my things are in one place. This is great. But what happens if that one place becomes the place that is discovered by a bad actor? And I can fully admit I'm the person who does not have their credit card information on their phone or have the ability to unlock their car with their phone because I want everything spread out. If one thing is going to go down, I want to be able to control it. So for a resident that's putting their information into that central location, there's a concern about security. And our government workers, our public sector servants, they are trying to ensure that they're being good stewards of our data and they're trying to protect their community's information. But there's a really complex threat of cyber attacks. And so when you're thinking about this, like, where does cybersecurity come into play and how can governments protect the digital identities of those who are interacting with their services?
That's really key to kind of how we're thinking about this and how we work through solutioning and architecting anything that we're building out related to this. I mean, that has to be first and foremost in this conversation is just like security, right? And there's a lot of approaches and there's a lot of situations. I mean, it gets even beyond security. I would even say kind of layered into that is data privacy and data permissioning, data ownership. How can I as a citizen own that data? How can I determine who can have access to it and not, right? And then on top of that, how do we make sure that that's secured based on, on top of those permissioning? So it comes down to two really big things for me, right? The very first thing is how do we help the citizen as much as possible do the right things to secure their information and, empower government to have those capabilities so that we're doing everything we possibly can. Some of that comes down to education. Some of that comes down to policy and rules and system kind of settings. Getting into good password practices and hygiene, taking full advantage of multi-factor authentication, both on the proactive and the reactive side of things with putting things in places to make sure people do the right things and then let them know when they maybe need to adjust or kind of think about that a little bit more. So yeah, I think for me, we have to start with the citizens. How do we do that aspect and help them as much as possible do the right things when it comes to security and security around their information?
Yeah, and I'll build on that, Beth, because with identity community, I think we recognize it can be very challenging in public sector. In some instances, we have clients or organizations that are using what I'll call homegrown solutions, all the way over to kind of where we started, where we've got a bunch of different departments and agencies that each have their own solution. And that can make it really challenging to apply policy across, right, all of those sort of underlying entities. The approach that we've taken is really to do two things. One, we've partnered with one of the industry leading IAM technology solutions, and that's Okta, which is a recognized leader as I'm going to add another acronym here, IPaaS, which is an identity platform as a service. But, we really in the analysis that we did looking for how we wanted to approach identity on authentication, we found Okta to be really one of the superior solutions. So we partnered with them. And then really the next step there was we've supplemented what Okta brings to the table with our own capabilities. And this is really where our domain experience at Tyler, really having worked across all different levels of government and really in different domain areas in government comes to the head. We're able to leverage their capabilities around things like network monitoring, password management, threat insight scanning, a lot of capabilities that are essentially built into their platform. And then we extend those with Tyler capabilities, right? So we have a cybersecurity team. That's an offering that we include as an option for our clients. It's a great example where we're able to extend on some of the basic capabilities that Okta has and really build on that. So for us, I think it puts us in a unique position where we're building on an industry leading platform. We're adding that public sector spin and know-how. And it puts us in really unique position to be able to best deal with different attack vectors or security practice that we know are common in public sector. So for you or I or Nick or anybody, a higher level of confidence when we're putting data behind that, authentication solution, putting in a profile, there's a higher level of confidence there.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear about all of the partnering that has to go into this, that it's not just a government and Tyler, a government and the resident, that there are other very experienced, important partners to kind of interface with. And so, I mean, I'm inclined to say, like, just call Tyler Technologies and we'll help you out with your CIAM, but that's maybe not the first step. So when you're thinking about the first step to get started, you all put some great information. Both of you contributed to some ebooks and some white papers about resident experience and identity and access management that I'll put in the show notes. But when you're thinking about those resources and the first steps that you want to start taking, how would you recommend governments get started exploring, implementing, deciding upon a modern CIAM system?
Yeah, I think the first thing is really that establishing a centralized CIAM system and creating a single sign-on experience across the government that creates immediate value both for government and for the residents, and is logically the first step that you have to be able to kind of build upon that and do so much more that is possible when you kind of think about the broader resident engagement, resident experience aspect of things.
Yeah, Beth, I'll kind of build on where Nick started. You have that SSO solution in place. The next thing is really getting those different department or agency services integrated right into that experience so that when somebody actually signs in, they can easily navigate across those different types of services, right? That gives you that very secure but fluid experience, being able to move around. Honestly, we find that to be one of the key steps that needs to occur. And if you think about it, really in terms of like, what do you do next? Well, it's really identifying parts of your organization that have really good use cases where it makes sense for them to be part of that integrated, improved resident experience. I'll add that this is a really good opportunity to get different stakeholders involved, right? Anybody that's had any experience in public sector and in government knows there's a lot of different stakeholders, right? A lot of different parties to participate. But this is a good opportunity where, for example, at the local level, you could get, people on your city council or your county commission. You could get resident organizations engaged, right? Think about folks who play a big role in terms of community and government. They can all help shape and prioritize, where you're going to start first, where you're going to go next, and so forth. I'll add one other big piece here, I think, that Nick and I have seen, and Nick kind of highlighted this. Obviously, at Tyler, we have a huge capacity to handle payments. That is an area that we do see a lot of attention. You think about a lot of the interactions that people have with government. The reality is, I'm paying something. I'm paying a bill. I'm paying a fee. So a lot of times those use cases will really bubble up to the top, right? That ability to make it easier and quicker to make a payment. Think about things like paying a utility bill. Obviously, it's a lot easier if it's something that becomes a scheduled or an auto payment, especially if it's a consistent amount every month. But there's other use cases like renewing a business license. You can think of other situations where you're interacting with government. Payments involved, a lot of times those are going to pop right up on the priority list.
So I'm hearing SSO first, stakeholders second, and then start thinking about the opportunities that you have to actively and regularly engage and what could be improved. So the payments example is, you're right, a very simple place. I am often paying my car license renewal, or maybe a parking ticket, or some other interface where I am having a regular interaction, that's the place to start. Once you've done that, after you've gotten started and assessed that, what are the emerging technologies or capabilities or technologies in the CIAM space that government should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, Beth, that's a great question. I mean, we've talked about the building blocks, right? And, Nick mentioned SSO. We see that a lot. We also see getting stakeholders engaged. Typically, payments is a big piece. I'll add as one other part of that before we roll into talking about some of the emerging things it's really getting your residents engaged. And so there is a bit of marketing involved in that, if you will. So I'll just kind of think of those things as kind of technology, people, process. You get very project oriented, but it's very much the idea that, hey, you can lay out a plan and really have some measurable success if you start to take those steps. Your question about emerging technologies is really a great one because we hear a lot of this, talking about what we think of as building blocks. But a great example of this would be something like identity proofing. So for those of you listening, identity proofing is simply using biometric data, something else in order to not just verify, hey, that's a valid email address, but also who is the person behind that email address. And so if you've had any experience where you had to take your picture on your phone, take a picture of your driver's license or your passport, and then that was essentially verified through a database, right? Comparing that image and the official document. That's a good example of a proofing exercise, right? Those are not new, but they're becoming more and more apparent because we're looking at making the shift from having what used to be these in-person interactions, right? Hey, I want to apply for a driver's license, and really moving those to an online experience. So that's a really good example of something that's kind of emerging. Nick and I we get asked about that a lot. Those are really good use cases, we would argue, after you kind of get that foundation in place. And Nick, I think we've seen some other areas as well.
Yeah, I mean, naturally, one of the more interesting ones, and that's coming up in our conversations more recently, is around artificial intelligence. Start kind of getting into the proliferation of the chat GPTs and some of those other artificial intelligence technologies, and starting to explore and think through how can you leverage some of those capabilities with these types of interesting data sets to help better support individuals in their experience with government. How can it be more automated? How can it be guided based on lots of history and lots of understanding of how other peoples have interacted with government services that have similar kind of profiles or similar kinds of situations. So really early still for us on that side of things, trying to make sure we're doing that in the right way. There's, of course, some risks in that, and we want to make sure we're approaching that very carefully, but also some really, really exciting potential with a lot of that.
Yeah, there's so much potential with what you just talked about. And it's always fun to me to talk about AI in this context, because for so many people, AI is like, oh my gosh, it's this new shiny thing. It's brand new. AI has been around since the 50s. Like, artificial intelligence is not a new concept, but the computing power has expanded so significantly that it is now so much more powerful than we could have previously predicted. But it's interesting to talk about that. And I love that you're calling that out as something to have in your mind, to be responsible with, to think about the data that you're using to train your AI models. If you're using any type of generative AI, that it's a critical thing to keep at top of mind so that governments can be responsible participants in shaping our AI future instead of catching up. Another thing to the identity proofing, I think I just chuckled to myself hearing you talk about that, Mike, because it's this idea of like, you want to see a picture of my face, when in reality, you would just bring your face with you to an in-person office, hand them your ID, write down your information, and then say, look, it's me. Whereas the idea of putting it through a digital interface seems so much scarier. But if we just bring ourselves back down to that idea of like, okay, we know that our governments are focused on cybersecurity, being good stewards of our digital identities. If our government is marketing that they are sharing that information appropriately with the only parties that need it, there's a safety that comes from me as a resident. Think, okay, they're not going to do something weird with my picture of my ID in the same way they wouldn't have done something with like, oh, they saw me in person at the counter and then I moved on with my day. So, I mean, there's so much to think about. I could probably continue asking you all questions about this for days, but I feel comforted to know that like I've learned some stuff in this conversation, but also that so much of it is things that I've already interacted with within government. None of this is so new that it's completely unfamiliar once you start chatting about it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Beth. And, and I think what we've seen really post-pandemic is there's been such a growth around online services. I mean, I think everybody's seen that. That's really been the big push in applying a lot of the existing technologies, right? IAM and some of these emerging technologies. I suspect we're going to continue to see a lot of significant growth over the next several years. So absolutely love to come back and talk to you about what we're hearing in a few years in the next podcast.
I'm hearing a part 2 already, Mike. You're ready. Nick, you're coming too. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today to talk about digital resident services and identity and access management and my new favorite acronym that I will say correctly this time, CIAM. I mentioned some resources today that you all contributed to. I want to make sure people get to read the ebook and the white paper, and I will link them in the show notes. But thank you both so much.
Thanks again for having us back.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thanks again.
Governments can leverage identity and access management systems, or CIAM systems, to improve their user experiences and security. I feel like I learned a lot in this conversation about the opportunities that exist for governments, and I hope that you, our listeners, did too. Thanks again to Mike and Nick for their time today. I am always delighted to learn from our internal Tyler experts. From Tyler Technologies, I'm Beth Amon. Thanks for joining us.